the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, he's now applied for fast-track membership to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, right? So let me just play you this clip quickly here, where he's signing the paper in front of the cameras, right? And when we say fast-track membership, remember, there's nothing fast about joining NATO, because you need every single existing member to approve the application, and right now there's about 30 of them. Sweden and Finland, they applied for fast-track NATO membership. And, you know, that was a huge scandal in and of itself, because, you know, those countries have maintained a neutral stance for a long time, and they suddenly, you know, threw that out the window and decided to join NATO. And then Germany, of course, which, you know, everybody tried to disarm and prevent from ever being able to cause another world war or Holocaust, is now suddenly allowed to spend 100 billion euros on its military. That's more than Russia, by the way. So now Zelensky wants to join NATO. And, you know, we come to the crux of the issue, which is that the expansion of NATO has always been a problem for the Russians. They've been saying this before anybody heard of Vladimir Putin. Okay, Vladimir Putin was a nobody when the Russians were raising this issue to Western diplomats and saying, you need to back off and stop, you know, edging and inching closer towards our borders. And it's funny because, you know, you have multiple historical documents you can point to, whether it's the minutes from the reunification talks, the 2+4 talks when they were reuniting Germany. You know, the Russians said, if you want us to support this, to allow East and West Germany to unite, you cannot expand NATO. That's the precondition. And they agreed. The West said yes. And then now they come back and say, hey, we didn't sign anything. Yeah, but you told the Russians that you would not expand NATO, and you lied. You lied. So then on top of that, you can point to 2008 Bucharest summit. There was a NATO summit where they explicitly said, we are allowing Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO. And that was, again, you know, under the Bush administration. You could see how even after the Cold War is done, and we're talking a couple of presidencies ago, they're still trying to provoke the Russians. They're still trying to go further. It's not enough they got Poland, you know, Lithuania. No, let's keep going. Let's keep going, man, as many as possible. Come on. Remember, since the end of the Cold War, NATO has doubled its membership. How does that make sense? NATO was created to fight the Soviets. The Soviets don't exist anymore. There is no Soviet Union. And you double the membership? Double, not grow it by a little bit, double it. No wonder the Russians are pissed, man. I'd be pissed. Now, it's funny because if you raise the 2008 Bucharest summit, you know, they say, oh, that's Russian propaganda. And funnily enough, the head of NATO himself references it today, where he says, look, man, we told them it's okay in 2008. And you know, we have an open door policy. Now, of course, he's not giving away the whole game. I'll play you his response to a question. Okay, this is Stoltenberg.
Membership. My question is NATO ready to consider that kind of applications? And the second part of the question, is it possible to consider the speedy procedure for that kind of membership, like it was done for Sweden and Finland? Thank you so much.
Every democracy in Europe has the right to apply for NATO membership, and NATO allies respect that right. And we have stated again and again that NATO's door remains open, and we have demonstrated that over the last years. NATO allies, when they met at the NATO summit in Madrid, stated also very clearly that we support Ukraine's right to choose its own path, to decide what kind of security arrangements it wants to be part of. Then a decision on membership, of course, has to be taken by all 30 allies, and we take these decisions by consensus. Our focus now is on providing immediate support to Ukraine, to help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian brutal invasion, and then that's the main focus and the main effort of NATO allies as we speak.
So you notice how he doesn't give an unequivocal yes? He's saying that, well, look, we have an open door policy, but he's not saying yes. And this is very embarrassing for Zelensky. It really is. I almost pity him. I almost pity him. He's trying so bad to be part of their club, and they won't let him in. But they're happy to use him. And on one level, it's kind of ironic because Ukraine is not a NATO member. They probably have more weapons than other actual members in NATO, right? I've lost count. I don't know. Is someone keeping count how many billions they've sent? I gave up counting. It's irrelevant at this point. It's irrelevant, right? Tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions now pumped into Ukraine. I mean, it's Christ. Those are just the ones we know about. So there are probably some other budgets that they don't disclose. Now, this is an interesting case study because, like we said, Finland and Sweden wanted to join, and they used fast track membership. Okay, now Turkey is a NATO member, of course, is the largest, I think, one of the largest NATO armies. And so they came out and said, no, we're not going to allow Sweden and Finland to join because Sweden and Finland have sanctioned us. They have an arms embargo on Turkey. They won't sell us weapons or vice versa. And they're supporting the PKK, which Turkey, in Turkey, they view the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, as a terrorist organization. So they're saying, well, you guys are supporting them in northern Syria. And so, you need to start extraditing some of those PKK members that you have in Scandinavia over to us. So, just yesterday, so this was 30th of September, the Swedes, they lifted a Turkish arms embargo because they're so desperate to get into NATO, right? Neutrality doesn't mean a thing anymore these days. And Turkey is actually still saying that they could cancel or walk back their support for membership, right, for Sweden and Finland. So this is from AFP, and they're talking about how basically the Scandinavians, they're not holding up their end of the deal. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because you have this excuse now being used as a means to block Ukraine, and you have some countries though that do want them in. Look, I'll show you this statement that was published from the leaders of. So this is from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, North Macedonia, Montenegro, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia, Czechia. They published a statement saying that, quote, "We support Ukraine in its defense against Russia's invasion. We demand that Russia immediately withdraws from all the occupied territories and encourage all allies to substantially increase their military aid to Ukraine." It's again, you see the Bucharest summit, which they refer to here. The leaders firmly stand behind the 2008 Bucharest NATO summit decision concerning Ukraine's future membership. And then in the AP article, they say that at the 2008 summit, NATO members welcomed Ukraine and Georgia's aspirations to join. I know. That's the problem that we've been pointing to for the last year, and you keep calling us Russian propagandists. Christ. So here's the interesting part. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, what do you think he had to say? You would think that he would say, yes, of course we want you to join. Please sign right here.
Ukraine is seeking accelerated membership in NATO. Is that something that's possible or something you would seriously consider?
The United States has been clear for decades that we support an open door policy for NATO. Any decision on NATO membership is between the 30 allies and the countries aspiring to join. Right now, our view is that the best way for us to support Ukraine is through practical on-the-ground support in Ukraine, and that the process in Brussels should be taken up at a different time.
So he gave the same response as Stoltenberg, right? He's basically saying that, listen, this requires unanimous consent, and this could take a while, so you need to chill and sit back. But don't worry, because we're going to give you the weapons, right? So that makes us a lot of money without us having to actually commit boots on the ground and fight the Russians ourselves. Like, you can fight the Russians, you guys in Ukraine, you can fight them, and we'll give you weapons because we make money that way, but we're not going to fight them. So, it's the EU doesn't want him, that NATO doesn't want him. I almost pity Zelensky. They have hung this guy out to dry. You really see how malicious the foreign policy is. So, they give Russia the impression that, we want Ukraine in NATO, and it's not just words, because we know that they actually train Ukrainian troops with this modular interoperability system, right? So when we say train Ukrainian troops, I'm not saying someone threw a rifle at the ground and said, shoot there. No, they train them to a very high standard, to a NATO standard, right? So they can all work together, but without integrating them. And they give them NATO weapons, right? if you don't give weapons to Ukraine right now, you'll be turned into a pariah like they almost did with Scholz. And even right now, Germany still doesn't want to give any Leopard tanks, Leopard tanks. So they're giving some, they'll give some training and some limited support and so on. But basically, there's the whole Western war machine supporting Ukraine. But they don't want Ukraine to actually join right now, because when you join NATO, you can invoke Article 5, and then basically you call for help from all the other members. And I'm paraphrasing, but it goes that an attack on one member shall be treated as an attack on all of us. Okay, so if Ukraine joins right now, which is unlikely, and they are, on their way to the NATO summit, and they invoke Article 5, and they say, you guys need to come help us because we're under attack, they have no choice but to respond. And so the Americans, they don't want to put boots on the ground, but they want to fight the Russians down to the last Ukrainian, milk this cow as much as they possibly can to make money. And then, of course, in the process, sever any ties between Russia and Europe so they can move, the European industry over to the US and have European industry buy American gas. So there are many advantages to keeping this as a proxy war, right? And when I say advantages, I mean disgusting fat capitalists with a top hat advantages, right? Obviously, this is not advantageous to people in Ukraine, right, who have to flee their homes or their cities and turn into refugees or are killed. No one is having fun, right? This is quite the opposite. It's hell. But, as usual, they when there's money involved, they're fine with war at NATO, as we very well know, right? So I want to show you just a quick video here. This is from Nasrallah, from the Secretary General of Hezbollah. Look at what he had to say.
في شعوب المنطقة أنتم الذين تراهنون على أمريكا. هي أمريكا، هذه أمريكا اليوم تقاتل حتى آخر أوكراني. أمس أول رد فعل شو طلعوا الأمريكان قالوا له لزيلينسكي المعطر أنه هو رد على ضم هذه الأقاليم الأربعة على روسيا. طلع كتب طلب التحاق بالناتو. شو قالوا له؟ قالوا له لا، الوقت غير مناسب. هذا وقت غير مناسب، مش وقته هلا. ليه؟ لأنه التحاق أوكرانيا بالناتو يعني أمريكا ملزمة أن تقاتل روسيا. أمريكا لا تريد أن تقاتل روسيا بالأمريكان، أمريكا تريد أن تقاتل روسيا بالأوكرانيين، وبعد الأوكرانيين بالأوروبيين، وتتفرج عليهم جميعا وتكسب النتائج والأرباح. هذه هي أمريكا. اعرفوا صديقكم وتمسكوا به وحافظوا عليه، واعرفوا عدوكم، وإذا كنتم لا تريدون أن تقاتلوه في الحد الأدنى لا تلجوا إليه، لأنكم لن تجدوا في أحضانه دفئا ولا أمانا، لن تجدوا سوى الغدر والخيانة.
I have nothing more to add. I could not have said it better myself.